Good morning. It is Friday the 10th of April. I'm Maeve McMahon and you're watching Europe Today, your daily dose of European news and analysis in just 20 minutes. Coming up, Israel's actions in Lebanon are putting the US-Iran ceasefire under severe strain. The EU's top diplomat Kaja Kallas has warned. After days of intense bombing, Israel has agreed to talks with Lebanon next week in Washington, focusing on the disarmament of Hezbollah. This as Russia's President Vladimir Putin has announced a rare temporary ceasefire with Ukraine for the duration of the Orthodox Easter holidays this weekend. The Kremlin made the announcement last night after Kyiv had proposed a pause in hostilities. And all eyes on Hungary, where parliamentary elections take place this Sunday. With just 2 days to go, the opposition TISA party is riding high in the polls. We'll have the latest from the ground. But first, after over 100 Israeli strikes across Lebanon this week, killing hundreds, Israel has said it will begin direct negotiations with Lebanon. This as the fragile ceasefire between the US and Iran hangs on a thread ahead of peace talks taking place in Pakistan. For more, we can bring in Euronews' Stefan Kobe. Stefan, good morning.
Good morning, Maeve.
What is the latest? Any hope for this weekend for these talks?
Well, there is a little hope, Maeve, as we are approaching a make-or-break moment in this war. US Vice President J.D. Vance is expected to leave Washington later this morning, US time, to fly to Islamabad, Pakistan, for high-stake talks. It's actually the highest level encounter between the US and the Iranians since 1979. Vance, you may recall, the only one in Donald Trump's inner circle who was against the war from the outset. Donald Trump overnight voiced optimism about the talks in Pakistan, but then he later ramped up his threats against the Iranians, basically saying that they violated the ceasefire agreement with Washington by not fully reopening the Strait of Hormuz. He was particularly angry after reports that Iran was charging fees to tankers going through the Strait of Hormuz, saying they better stop now.
And meanwhile, what about Lebanon? We're hearing there could be talks between Israel and Lebanon. Fill us in.
Well, first of all, we haven't seen any renewed airstrikes over the past few hours. That's good news, although the Israeli Defense Forces warned residents of southern Beirut that strikes may be coming and that they better evacuate the place. Then last night, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced that he has instructed his cabinet to open direct talks with Lebanon to disarm Hezbollah and establish peace relations between the two countries. That is an important development because until now, Israel's strategy seemed to have been something like, you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs, meaning hit hard first and talk later. So now he is willing to show some restraint, at least, and hopefully the extension of the ceasefire will be everywhere, and we see that in Lebanon too.
Well, we'll keep a very close eye on that, Stefan Kobe. Thank you so much for that update. And as those talks get underway this weekend, the International Monetary Fund has warned that the Iran war will permanently upset the global economy, even if a peace deal can be reached. But now NATO chief Mark Rutte is in Washington this week, where he met with the US President Donald Trump, who has not hidden his anger against NATO allies for not intervening to help him in Iran. Let's take a listen now to how Mark Rutte described his encounter.
So it was a good conversation. It was open and candid. I sensed his disappointment about the fact that he felt that too many allies were not with him. And I explained to him yesterday, I said, hey, Mr. President, clearly the overwhelming majority of Europeans have done what the US asked of him and what was previously agreed in these circumstances.
Mark Rutte there speaking in DC, and President Trump, of course, has threatened several times to leave the NATO allies in recent days unless the coalition intervenes to secure the Strait of Hormuz. For more, our correspondent Shona Murray now is here in the studio. Shona, good morning. Tell us, are NATO allies really under pressure here to reopen the strait?
They're under huge pressure now. Donald Trump issued an ultimatum through Mark Rutte in DC saying that NATO allies need to come up with a solution to reopening the Strait of Hormuz within days and not weeks. This was confirmed to me last night by a NATO source who said that they'll probably end up having to send vessels, maybe warships, certainly personnel, and get it open. Now, we know that around 40 countries, mainly through NATO, but also Japan, Australia, South Korea, have been working on a plan to secure it when the hostilities end, because they didn't want to put their own people in harm's way. But Donald Trump is saying, no, we need that done immediately. So massive pressure. And remember, it's in the context of Donald Trump berating NATO and threatening to leave the alliance, because it's really, really a very difficult moment for them.
And meanwhile, you spoke exclusively to Turkey, NATO ally. You spoke to their trade minister. What did he have to say about all this?
Well, Turkey's very interesting in all of this because, remember, they had to intercept at least 4 ballistic missiles that went into Turkish airspace from Iran, the Iranian war. So it nearly dragged NATO into the whole conflict. Turkey is also involved in some of the negotiations, and it's the second biggest army inside NATO. And I caught up with the trade minister, Umar Bolat, and I asked him what he thought about the ceasefire in particular, whether Lebanon was involved and whether or not he thought it was going to last.
If the U.S. wants a lasting and sustainable peace in the Middle East, as Mr. Trump acclaimed after the ceasefire was set, somebody should say no to Israel and Israel's actions. Therefore, international community should rise up from now on to say no to Israel's unjust actions in the region.
Now, Turkey is the second largest army in NATO, one of the most important NATO allies. Do you worry about the future of it if Donald Trump is constantly threatening to either withdraw or to stay inside but hold it to hostage in some way?
I mean, politicians and leaders may have some statements depending on circumstances, timing, and place, and the incidents. However, when it comes to reality and also international politics, I'm sure that common sense will prevail. And NATO's presence as a deterring force also to keep peace and security, mainly on the European continent, but in the world, because there is no any other deterring force like NATO in the other parts of the world. Then member countries, I'm sure, will come together and agree on uniting and getting united, and on strengthening NATO as a, security zone and peacemaking deterring force for the world security.
Do you think, though, that NATO members have an obligation to join the US and Israel now to reopening and securing the Strait of Hormuz?
So far, there have been no any indications of that. It seems that NATO member countries had a stance to keep silent on the sidelines of this very critical war, because no one consulted with the NATO members whether to attack Iran or not. So it seems that the NATO member countries seemed that this would be short-lived, but it didn't. It wasn't short-lived, and they did not think about very negative effects on their economies, on the world economy, and they thought that this was an operation only to be carried out for the interests of Israel, not for NATO's interests, not for the world's goodness, I would say.
But do you think it's fair then that Donald Trump is asking for their help now, because he's saying, we're all in NATO, you have an obligation to help me because now I'm under pressure. Do you think they're obliged, or are they within their rights to say, we are a defensive organisation and we weren't consulted about this conflict?
Yes. Your question is also the answer for that.
Okay.
Turkey's Trade Minister there, Omar Bolat, speaking to our Shona Murray. And now for the view from the United Nations. Euronews' Maria Tadeo spoke exclusively to the President of the UN General Assembly, Annalena Baerbock, and started by asking her what the UN can say or do when a US President threatens to wipe out a whole civilization.
I made very clear from the beginning of this war that the Charter of the United Nations is not optional, including the protection of civilians, including humanitarian law. And obviously, in a situation with a nuclear threat, with severe human rights violations in Iran, there's a responsibility for the world, but within international law. And this means, first of all, protections of civilians. And therefore, it was very important that there was a strong backlash against this rhetoric, which is contradicting international human rights and international law.
I got to ask you, the reason why I mention is the UN still capacitated to make sure that international law still applies is because we've seen much criticism over the past year suggesting that the UN is part of the problem, that the UN has not been able to adapt to new times, that the UN has not been able to resolve any major conflict over the past 2 years, and that it has become obsolete. Is that fair criticism? Is there a need for reform? Or do you look at it and say it is ultimately being politicized? This criticism is political.
Without any doubt, the UN needs a deep reform, but we're in the midst of this reform. It's called UN 80. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General, has started this process last year, meaning to make it more efficient. We have more than 40,000 mandates, meaning resolution, which is the UN is dealing with. Since 17 years, we are trying to reform the Security Council. We just touched with the veto initiative, but unfortunately, it needs the agreement also by the members of the Security Council. And I always relate a bit to the national context because, for example, also in all our European countries, we have clear rules that you should not kill anybody. Unfortunately, murder still happens. And nobody would say, OK, we should just get rid of the criminal code now because we could not prevent the murders. But police and the work in society has to as much as to counter it. And it's the same for the United Nations. We have to do every day to be better than the day before, but we heavily depend on the member states. And if a member state starts a war of aggression, then it's not the UN failing or the charter is not clear enough that this is not allowed, but it's a member state who is in well awareness of breaching the charter, pressing this war forward. And this is why it needs the counter pressure from other member states as well. And there's a quote of one of the former Secretary General, which I think is important to remember what the UN is for. It says, the UN was built not to bring humanity to heaven, but to prevent humanity from hell.
Do you consider that the Board of Peace could become a challenger, a contender to the UN, or is that something that you simply do not see will be a credible rival in the future? It cannot outlast the UN.
There's a good reason that at the UN, every member state, no matter how big or small, how powerful, has an equal seat at the table. And this is unique responsibility and also the unique role the UN can play. And member states made very clear, also those who joined the Board of Peace, that this is only with regard to Gaza, and for any other matter on peace and security, it's for a good reason, the United Nations, where you don't have to pay because you're representing the people of your country and everybody is equal.
Annalena Baerbock there speaking to our Maria Tadeo. Now, just 2 sleeps to go until Hungary's parliamentary elections take place this very Sunday. And for the first time since coming into power in 2010, Viktor Orban faces a real opposition with the TISA party of Peter Mayer. For the latest, we can cross now over to Budapest and bring in our Hungary correspondent, Adam Mayer. Good morning, Adam. So it's the final push now for this campaign. Tell us, what are the contenders up to for the last couple of days?
Good morning to you as well. As you mentioned, we are in the final stages of the campaign, and both contenders are campaigning very heavily online at a very different pace offline. So the Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, is only going to have 2 campaign rallies, one tomorrow and one today, while the opposition leader, Péter Magyar, is going to have 11 campaign rallies. The earliest one is starting at 9:30 in the morning. So he's traveling the country and trying to get to the voters at the last minute as well. And it's also worth mentioning that this evening there is going to be a super concert, I would say, in Budapest, which will span for more than 7 hours with more than 40 artists performing. And the aim of this concert is to motivate opposition voters to go to the polls on Sunday. And this concert is not organized by Péter Magyar's party, the TISA party, but by an NGO, an independent NGO. So as we are approaching the final days, the pollsters are publishing their last opinion polls ahead of the elections, and we don't see big shifts. So independent pollsters still say that the opposition is leading, but many people are cautious. Many people are thinking that maybe the pollsters are not right. So we are in a very intense situation, and we will have a very exciting last 2 days and an exciting election night in Hungary.
Absolutely, Adam Mayer. And we can see blue skies behind you there. That will spell well, perhaps, for voter turnout. Thank you so much there for that live broadcast from the Hungarian capital. And as you can imagine, Brussels is holding its breath ahead of these votes after a dramatic campaign that revealed close ties between Viktor Orban's government and the Kremlin. The European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, said yesterday, through a spokesperson, that she intends to raise this important issue with European leaders. For more, I'm joined now in the studio by Euronews editor, Maria Tadeo. Maria, just a reminder, viewers, how big the stakes are here for the European Union.
Well, look, this election is the big one. Talk to any diplomat, they'll tell you the Hungarian election is by far the most important and the most consequential for the European Union for all the reasons that you listed. Obviously, there's the sanctions policy at stake, the veto policy, which is driving everyone crazy within the European Council. Now the tapes coming out between the Russian foreign minister and the Hungarian foreign minister. Look, no one is shocked that these two talk, but the idea that you now have that on tape obviously has incredibly resonated across the table. And again, it feeds into this idea that we've now talked about. This is not just a political clash. This clash between Budapest and Brussels has been years in the making. But for many member states, you look at Poland, the Baltics, etc., they say this is now a question of serious national security because of this Russian aspect into this campaign. Now, when you look at the polls, and this is where it gets relevant, Viktor Orban could lose or would lose, if you believe those polls, the Hungarian election. And that means that Péter Magyar will be and will lead the next government. Péter Magyar is not your pro-European in the classical liberal sense of the word, but it is or could be a significant shift from the current administration for 2 reasons. He's saying he wants to make Hungary now a fully functioning member of the EU and NATO. He also says he wants to tap into the frozen cash. This is money, both structural money for Hungary, which has been blocked now for years over concerns of rule of law, but also defense money that Hungary needs to rebuild its army. Now, to do that, something will have to change when it comes to certainly rule of law. Whether that is structural, cosmetic, the degree of the change remains to be seen, but that is something that will have to change. Now, for the European Union, this has been a campaign where they have really played this very low profile. They have been very concerned that whatever they say or do could be instrumentalized on the campaign trail by the Orban side. But as it stands now, you're looking at an election that could bring change into Hungary in a way that has massive ramifications for the EU.
And if not, what about if Viktor Orban does stay? Does Brussels have a plan?
Look, and that's a very good question because, Maeve, the polls at this stage would say, you know, there's a double-digit lead. No one that I speak to in Brussels actually believes, and we'll see on Sunday, you know, maybe we'll be back here and we'll eat our words, but nobody believes that that is going to manifest in the sense that when you enter the final days of the campaign, new votes come in, you can say something in the polls, but actually when it comes to the exact day, you change your mind. They are preparing. You would be a fool to count Viktor Orban out. And of course, I could see an Orban that is perhaps lighter, but also stronger when it comes to all of the blocking points, the sanctions, the veto, etc.
OK, whatever happens, of course, with these elections, we will report it. And Maria Tadeo, you'll be live with our team in Budapest on the ground. We'll also have a special live show, rolling coverage, bringing here right here on Europe Today Monday. So tune in for that and keep an eye on our live blogs as well online. Thank you so much, though, for watching. Take care and stay with us here on Euronews.